Welcome everyone to Mailfuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Severance Season 2 Episode 1. It's called Hello Miss Cobel. So spoilers for the episode. It's been 3 years since Season 1 of this show. I don't know what scares me more, the gap between or just like how quick that actually feels now. I'm getting old, we're all doomed, death is approaching, but I digress. Excited to have the show back. We'll be talking about surprise Keanu Reeves. We'll be talking about what possible twists and turns they might be planning for us. What the company of Lumen's actually doing. It seems like we're starting the breadcrumbs to maybe getting answers to that. Yeah, and also what the hell's going on in the outside world. I think that's probably the biggest thing. In a good way. When I say this is a frustration, I mean purely like they know what they're doing here. But the whole episode, I was like, what is going on in the outside world? Give me the outer world. I want it right now. And that's what I was feeling for a lot of this episode, because we never see the outside world, really. We just stay to the inner world, and we see all from Mark's perspective. There's kind of like a portion at the start of the episode, which is him on his own with a new team, and him kind of challenging Milkchick, who's now in charge of the floor. He's taken over Miss Cobel's job. So there's some stuff to get into that. But if I was to make a critique, because I enjoyed the episode. I'm really happy to have the show back. It felt really nice to really hit on some of these characters again, particularly in the back half when it got to some emotional stuff. John Turturro just killed it this episode with what effectively was him wanting to end his life by leaving and never coming back. Because this is the big thing that we've built up with this show, is this idea that the innies, if they retire, if they just stop coming to work, then that version of the person is effectively dead. And that's something that Irving wants in this episode. And I thought that scene, and I thought Dylan speaking him out of it, saying that he's his friend and that he would be sad if he's gone, and even alluding to the fact that this would just be death. Like, this would just be you being gone. I thought that was a very touching scene. I thought maybe the scene of the episode. I don't know if I'm doing that for this show, but look, very much the scene of the episode. But if I've got a critique, it's that maybe that first chunk where it's just Mark on his own with the new characters, which is not to say that I didn't enjoy that part or that some of the new characters weren't cracking me up. Bob Balaban's there is like another Mark. Mark W, I think his name was, and he was making me laugh quite a bit. Ilya Shawkat's there, and she was kind of funny. But I will say, I did kind of get this feeling of like, this section, I hope it doesn't last too long. And then once it was over and we were back with the rest of the team coming back, I did think to myself, I'm sure there's going to be some important things from that first chunk later on. But for the context of what I enjoyed in the rest of the episode, it didn't feel like anything in that first 15, 20 minutes meant much to me as of yet, other than just the general mystery of what's going on in the outside world. And Milkchick says repeatedly that they are refusing to come back. The outside versions of those characters aren't coming back, but for some reason your outie Mark is coming back. Now, I think, thinking about that for a second, why would outie Mark want to send his innie self back inside to the company? The answer seems pretty obvious to me. If in any way outside Mark understood or heard what inside Mark said when he was out, because the final moment of season 1 was when innie Mark woke up in the outside and he saw a photograph of Mark's dead wife, he yelled, "She's alive." So outside Mark has possibly the most motivation for wanting to have a version of himself back inside the company to try and figure out what's going on in there. Now, we're told that 5 months have passed at this point from the end of season 1, and it's possible that when Mark comes back again after this opening section, when the rest of the characters come back, it's possible another time jump's happened there. We don't know. He even says that it could be longer than that now. We do not know. There's no reason to suspect, because of the way the time works with them turning off when the elevator, doors shut, and then turning back on when the elevator opens again. We have no idea of how much time is passing between those. I mean, we know it's not an absurd amount of time because they'd look much older, but other than that, we don't really have any concrete idea yet. But that does at least give us the emotional motivation for why outside Mark would want to send inside Mark back in here. Now, why would the company of Lumen be okay with any of these characters coming back? I think that's a question that maybe feeds into what they're doing and what's going on. The fact that like there is so many weird connections to Mark, that's not just that he works there. The fact that his neighbor was Miss Cobel, something that Milchick actually tries to explain as she had a unhealthy attraction to you and wanted to date both the innie and outie version of you. He tries to explain that away as her being some kind of like pervert. Basically, that's his explanation for it. I don't buy it for a second. I don't think that's why she was doing it. I don't think it was an attractive or like her an attraction thing. I don't believe that. I think he's covering up. I don't think he even believes that. I think there's far more to that story, and it makes me wonder, where is Miss Cobel? I know what's her face, Patricia Arquette, still listed in the cast, so we're definitely going to be seeing her. Now, has she been held by the company because she was doing stuff she wasn't supposed to? Is she kind of gone rogue and she's on the outside working with the outies in some way? These are both possibles. There's possibilities all in between those two that I can't fathom, but interesting thing to think about as well. So that's cool. But yeah, like, so to tie into so I think at the end of season 1 initially, or not even the end of season 1. The end of season 1's where any Mark found out about the dead wife also being the guidance counselor, Miss Casey, her name, Lackman, the actress I know from Dollhouse mainly. Right, that was a good moment. The thing that I wasn't necessarily as convinced by was the reveal that that's who that was. Like the idea that, oh, his wife is some character we've already seen who's on the inside of the company. Now, whether or not she's aware that she's his wife, I would guess no. I'm pretty sure that's what I felt last season, and I think I'd still say that as of right now. But I remember feeling like that was maybe the one twist or one reveal that didn't immediately satisfy me. It felt a little bit like a big sort of shocking twist for shocking twist's sake. Like you know, too much stuff is connected to Mark. Although arguably the fact that his boss was also living next door was already maybe a little too many connections. However, I think now that we're starting to build up a little bit more of this, and especially given the ending, which is Mark starts to input the data again and pick the numbers and puts the numbers in the box, and the screen flashes, and we get a hint that whatever he's doing has something to do with his wife, with his quote-unquote dead wife, where it flashes to her face, and there's a bunch of other like data information. I did pause it and looked at it. There was really nothing I could tell here. There was a lot of numbers and a lot of little like letters with like initials that had like a number value next to it. So clearly it's like he's mapping a person, someone he knows, and it instantly made me think, wait, are all the people who are hired for this job, are they all secretly working subconsciously on a person they know or care about? Is that, or is it just Mark? Is that why he's so important to have back? Is that why when he makes his demands to get his team back, that however long it takes for them to convince all the outies to do it, ultimately he gets what he wanted, and that's why they're all back together, is because it's important to Lumen that he keep doing what he's doing, because him deconstructing or mapping or something based on like his subconscious tied to his wife is important for what they're doing. Now, is it important because they're trying to prove something about humans? Is it important because they're using his wife as something, and it's important that they understand her in some weird deep level that like no one else could? I don't know. But if you remember back when he explained what they were doing to Helly back in season 1, you know, I remember him talking about how you're basically getting an emotional response from the numbers, and you're kind of clicking on the ones that seem kind of scary. And it feels like, okay, so he's looking at these numbers and he's getting an emotional response, and that's because deep behind the numbers, they're representing someone that he cares about. And, you know, there's little hints that maybe the why he has like a sort of soft connection with Casey is because it's really his wife. And that's why there's kind of a weird vibe there. Or whatever. Like what exactly are they testing? But I think that little tease at the end is exciting because the idea of answering what they're actually doing down here, what sort of experiment is this, what sort of endeavor is this, that's fascinating in its own right. But I think the fact that it's to do directly with his wife it does mean that he didn't just sign up for this job because he wanted to forget his dead wife, even though that was a really good emotional motivation at the time. It feels like, no, they wanted him to sign up because his work is tied directly to someone. Because, you know, it definitely implies to me that they faked her death, or they did kill her and somehow she's back again. Like, have they, like, are they effectively building someone back to life based on, like, the data that he's putting in about her memory? Now, how him clicking on numbers that represent parts of her in some way like lead to being able to build an artificial recreation of her. If I mean, I'm going off the deep end here. Look, it seems to me that it's very important to them that he's the one doing this specifically, because it is what he's actually doing with the numbers is tied directly to something that is personal to him in the real world. I think that's very important, and I don't think that's something we can just ignore here. And it does beg the question, is that what all the others are doing as well? Are they all putting in numbers based on something they're seeing behind the numbers, something that's there that's tied to who they really are in the real world? And is that the point? Is the point is that they've taken these memories away, but these people are still like feeling a connection to things, right? Is that why Miss Casey was their counselor? Because they wanted to see how he would react to seeing her, or indeed how she would react to seeing him if she is equally also an innie that doesn't remember what the real world was like when she was quote-unquote alive. Interesting, right? Yeah, what if it's like, okay, they faked her death physically, right? That was obviously faked. But what if effectively the outie version is dead because they were experimenting the severance process on her and they accidentally, like, killed the outie version or something? You know, like the idea that they erased the rest of her and only the innie version remained, and that's how tragic that is. Like, maybe there's something's went on there. I don't know. Maybe that's the point. Maybe they're trying to have, like, a loved one input data that'll help them kind of rebuild who the person was. Not necessarily out of guilt or anything like that, but just to try and cover their tracks, even though her death's already, like, official, so I don't know why they would. But anyway, the point is that I could probably ramble 50 more ideas off, and I don't really know what the answer is. But I'm intrigued. It was a very... I think as far as, like, what they're really doing at the computers with the numbers, I think this tease of it being tied to something personal to them is probably one of the more interesting things they could have done to get the mind going here early on. Because if it was just, you know, they're picking numbers that's deciding who gets killed in, like, a bunker somewhere on the other side of the planet, and it's not like a connection thing, that would be fine. Like, that would work as a, you know, as a realization for them to feel shocked that they're helping with that sort of thing. But this feels a bit more interesting, especially since the show is all about identity, and it's about, you know, what constitutes an identity, what constitutes a life. Are the innies and outies both alive? Do they both have equal rights? That kind of thing. At what point are they different people? And reintegrating them, is that killing both, or rightfully merging them together because they're supposed to be one life? These questions. So the idea that the data itself and what they're doing is them doing something to try and, on a very cold level, like, mathematically say who a person is. When what we're seeing in the rest of the show as an audience is the actual human qualities that make all these characters or real people. So, stuff to think about. Stuff to think about. I went on a whole thing here. The other thing to talk about is the other characters, right? So I mentioned Irving and Dylan and their sort of heart-to-heart when Irving's trying to leave. I thought that was very touching, him admitting finally what he saw on the outside. Of course, they all exchange what they saw on the outside to an extent. Mark's pretty honest. He says what he saw. We know it's all true. Helly, on the other hand, is not so honest. And there's a few things here that are quite interesting. Now, throughout most of the episode, I was kind of thinking it was very down the middle, 50-50 ambiguous as to whether or not they'd pulled something here. Now, what had they pulled, potentially? I think that it was 50-50 whether or not Helly was actually Helly. And what I mean by that is it just the outside version of her? The one that's part of the family who's responsible for this place? is it just her pretending to be Helly? And there was just a couple things that kind of said that that could be the case. But at the same time, I think her lying about what she saw in the outside world could just be her being ashamed of who her outside person is, and she doesn't want to admit it. Particularly, I think when Mark and her have a one-to-one, and she brings up the wife and talking about how, you know, we are not the same as our outies, that's a different person, and speaking for myself, like, you know, I owe her nothing. Like, that felt like a genuine moment from Helly, right? That felt like something that made me think, oh, maybe it is just Helly, and she is just feeling conflicted about admitting a lot of this stuff. But this idea of her deciding to stay, because obviously Helly was the one that wanted to leave constantly last season, right? That was her whole determination. And while I'm convinced by the end of this episode that it's not really her, I do think it's the outside version who's pretending to be the inside version. I do think that I like the idea that Helly, having realized who the outside version of herself is, now only exists in here. So in a weird way, like, I know she chooses to stay because she wants to help Mark find his wife and, like, sort of manipulate potentially what's going on there. But part of me did think that there could be, like, a more personal motivation here, which is, this is the only place this version of her gets to live now. Like, ultimately, the only choice she has now, the NA Ellie only has two choices, really, if she ever is back, which is either she stays here as an innie with everyone else, or she dies, and the monster version of her, the outside version, is just alive forever. Well, not forever. She'll die eventually. But you know what I mean. And in the sense of, like, controlling this body, this life. And I think that's an interesting question. The idea that Helly was the one that was determined to leave, only to find out that the outside version of her is probably the most different to the inside version in a lot of ways. I mean, admittedly, we didn't see a whole ton of Dylan's outside life. We know he's got a family, but it definitely feels that she's the one who is the most drastically different. That said, though, there's always the potential as well that maybe outside Helly maybe sympathize with everything. I don't know, but anyway, the thing that convinced me, though, that it's the outside version of Helly, or is it Helen? Is the full name? I don't know. Just to differentiate, it might be useful. But it's when she goes to turn on the computer at the end, she has to sort of find the switch. And to me, that was that felt like the director was saying, and by the director, I mean Ben Stiller in this case, was saying, hey, any Helly would know where that switch is now. But here she doesn't seem to. So it kind of felt like a little sign to the audience that something's not quite right here, that it's not actually her. But it does make you wonder. She does do a very good job of having, like, a repertoire with the other characters. It feels like she's still kind of fitting in with them. It doesn't feel like she's completely out of left field, which makes me think at the very least that the outside Helly has been studying whatever they recorded of these people's interactions, that she has been prepping for this, and she is trying to fit in and seem like Helly, right? And they say, hey, there's no cameras anymore. We respect your rights. There's privacy. You don't have to hide in the break room to have a conversation. And they all whisper anyway, but maybe the reason they can agree to no cameras and microphones is because they've just got a spy who's in the team who's going to hear everything they're saying and figure out, like, what they're up to. So that's interesting, which I guess we have to talk about that side of it as well, is the company saying that these four got famous on the outside, and there's, like, a photo of them in, like, a car all waving to a crowd, which is not real. I'm just going to, like, that is straight up fabricated. Anything that they say to them about what's happened on the outside world, I just do not believe for a second. For one, the idea that Helly on the outside would be championing against all this is one. Now, clearly there's been some differences, potentially. But if I was to guess right now, I don't think it made an impact in the outside world. I think that it was squashed. There's maybe some people who heard it. You know, I think Mark's family, his sister and whatnot, they probably are a lot more dubious and maybe try to talk Mark out of you ever going back or what. But I don't think it was this big thing. And it feels like to me that part of, like, this ongoing experiment, or them trying to control everyone, is just to make them convinced that there's been a reform but there isn't really, right? They make up this big story about how these 4 people are kind of company history now, and that's when we get the little informational movie with Keanu Reeves' voice in the building. Keanu Reeves is Lumen. It was one of those things where you just like you hear the voice, and then it took like a sentence or two, but I'm like, is that Keanu Reeves? That sounds like Keanu Reeves. So yeah, I think that stuff. I think the company's full of crap. I haven't even mentioned Miss Hong yet, who is the new assistant to Milkcheck, who is a child. To which other characters do actually point out, why are you a child? I think that was Bob Balaban in the first section, to which she responded, because of when I was born, which does not really answer the question. I mean, it answers the literal question, but what he really meant was, how are you working at a company? You're like 12, and she does not give a proper answer. And that is, I mean, that feels like it's designed to mess with them, potentially. Does that suggest that they're up to more weird things? Like, if this... Now, we know that Milkchick isn't severed, or at least he says he isn't, so I don't think he is anyway. I didn't think he was in season 1. But it would be like the show to reveal that, oh, he's actually been severed this whole time, he just didn't know it. That would be something. But it does make me wonder if, like if this kid, if Miss Hung is severed, like, is her outie more of a normal kid, but because the innie is just like in the workspace, like how does that work exactly? Like, does she act like more of a grown-up who's scheming in the corporate world? Because that's what it feels like. She feels like she's nosy in this episode. Also, Milch's computer still says "Hello, Miss Cobel," which is where the title of the episode comes from. And he's not very happy about it. He's demanding it be fixed, and he wants to know when it's going to be fixed as soon as possible. And he ends up turning the computer off in frustration at the end of the episode. And again, this whole show being about identity and what makes us who we are, him being frustrated that like the computer isn't saying his name or showing his name, it's a little fun thing. Actually, I will say the opening scene, which is Mark comes out the elevator and sort of runs through the maze of hallways to get to wellness, which is where Miss Casey normally is, only to find that the doors have been like walled over and it's not there. It's just gone. And that's like a shock for him, and that's before he meets the new characters. I will say I didn't love that opening scene just purely because I thought that the CG, because this is the thing, they basically did this where he's effectively running on like a treadmill or something, surrounded by green screen, and they've just like CG'd in all the walls and the doors that he's running past, because they wanted to do this thing where the camera's kind of spinning around, and it's doing all these unnatural things that would be very difficult to do in a real physical set. So it has kind of this fake look to it, to the point where I actually thought that it was going to turn out to be a dream. I thought like the real Mark in the outside world was going to wake up, and this was going to be like a nightmare he was having or something, because he's heard in some capacity that his dead wife was inside this company, and he's having nightmares about being there or something like that. Because it had a really kind of fake otherworldly look to it. And then it turned out that he was actually just going through this, and then he met the new team, and I was like, okay, fair enough. Like I get the point of the scene, but I didn't think it visually looked that good to my eye. But like I say, so there's a little bit of get to like the meat feeling in the first like 15 minutes in this episode for me, and part of that's just waiting 3 years and wanting to catch up with these characters. And then even once I was getting into that stuff, I was like, okay, I want to see what's going on in the outside world. Let's get to the outside world. And we don't do that this episode. But I was a lot more emotionally invested in what was going on with the characters in the back half of this episode, questioning Helly and what's going on with her. Even like the reaction from Dylan when they're showing the little film, and it's like the claymation, and it shows some of the things that happened. One of the things that it shows is that they kissed, and Dylan's reaction to that of turning around and be like, what the hell? I thought was quite funny. Him being surprised at that was quite good. So that's really fun. And then, of course, like the actual one-on-one between Irving and Dylan, and Irving ultimately deciding to not leave and to stay. And that's kind of like a sort of big sort of fist pump moment at the end when he walks in. It's like he chose not to go. Dylan was able to convince him. That's really sweet. But, you know, even the way he talks about it when he's trying to leave is that, you know, maybe if I go and never come back, I'm essentially gone, and maybe me and that Bart will be together, right? You know, he's upset about Christopher Walken's character because he's got a family in the outside world, and that's heartbreaking to him. And Dylan tries to say, hey, no, it was the innie Bart that you fell for. That's who I saw the chemistry with. So I think exploring that's going to be really interesting. I think Turturro did a really great job with that. I mean, both of them did, to be fair, but Turturro was the one that was making it emotional because he was the one that was breaking down. So like once I got to all this stuff, all this meaty like character stuff for the characters that I'd grown attached to, I was super into everything it was doing, and then the tease at the end was great. We also have to address, there's like a scene where Milchick wants to see Dylan. It's right after the emotional scene, actually, where he takes him to a side room at his office, which was Cobel's office in season 1, and shows him the plans for a new area in the building. And this is right after he tells him what his wife's name is. He says, your wife's name is Gretchen, I think it was. If I'm misremembering that, I don't think it's important what his wife's name is yet, but it brings him in and says, hey, this is like the new Outie visitor center, where part of the reforms going forward is that loved ones of workers can come and visit the innie. And he gets excited about this because he wants to see his family, and Milchick says, hey, don't tell the others because they're all single. I don't want there to be resentment, which again feels like a manipulation thing to me. Like, we'll see if Dylan adheres to that for very long. But even this idea that the Outie's family will come and visit the innie in like not like a prison visit, but it felt like, I don't know, it felt like a prison visit to me, or even all borderline like a human zoo, where you go and see the innie version of your loved one, but they can't leave with you. Like, they're on their own. Like, surely this is just another way to traumatize the innies, because they'll get a glimpse of what their life is like in the outside, but they can't go to them. And I imagine the family of the person, like, how are they going to feel when they see someone breaking down in this like visiting room, possibly behind glass? It was unclear if they'd be in the room together, or if there was going to be like glass separating them. But either way, that feels like it's just going to be more traumatic to me. I don't know. I don't think that's going to help. So I think that's fascinating. They also, again, give them this choice where they're allowed to like decide to leave and never come back at the end of each day. Not the outie. The innie can choose to never come back. Like, if the innie now has a right to say that they want to leave this work, regardless of what the outie says, which on paper does seem fair, because the innie's the one having to do all the work and live this life. So if they say, no, this is torture, I don't want to be here. But it does feel, it's funny because I'm working through Squid Game season 2 right now, and a big part of that is this idea of like, hey, we're giving you this choice, that's democracy, but it's really just manipulation and just sort of like goading them into a certain thing. It kind of feels like that here as well. It feels like, hey, we're dangling the carrots that you want to see dangled, but we're just getting more creative with how we actually run this place. But if nothing else, the thing that I have felt at the end of this, like, all of this was fascinating. The tease of what's actually going on in those computers and what work they're doing is super interesting. But that feeling at the end of this episode is I have to see the outside world. I have to see how outside Mark processed what presumably his sister and brother-in-law told him he said when he was in innie. Like what is the fallout from that? Now, we never actually got to see a lot of the others on the outside world, other than the ending and like that one moment with Dylan. So I'm really curious to see if we see more of them in the outside world this season, or if we stay as closed off from them. Now that we've established who they are in the outside world. And let's not forget the creepy paintings that Irving was doing on the outside of the red elevator door down the dark hallway, because that seems like it's probably going to come up this season somehow. So, no, that was very good. Like, I think that I felt a little frustrated for that first 15-20 minutes, but in a way that's intentional, because you're meant to feel that along with the character about where his team is. But the way it just kind of like becomes like, oh, you can't see them again, that's not possible, and then suddenly it is possible. Like, part of that's a little frustrating, but part of me also goes, okay, how did the outies get convinced to let themselves come back in here? How did the outside version of Dylan agree to this? Irving, like, did outside Mark go and speak to them? Like, did he convince them on the outside world somehow? Did something else convince them? That's what I want to know. Did the company somehow convince them some way? These are questions I have, and I'm excited to see where we go from here. So I really hope we get some of the outside world next time. And maybe they won't. Maybe they'll hold it for a few episodes because they know it's a huge element that they've got dangling for us all salivating to get to. They can keep that from us for a few episodes if they've got enough juicy stuff to do on the inside. So yeah, it's weekly, which is great. I love weekly shows. It's so much easier to cover, and it means no one's like ahead, and we can all kind of enjoy the speculation and discussion episode to episode. But thank you very much for joining me. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, and of course you can like, subscribe, comment what you thought of the episode below. All those things help out a bunch too. But that is me, so thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?